Lily hadn't thought about Daniel in over a decade. Life had a way of pushing people apart, even when they once meant everything to each other. She was sitting at her friend's wedding reception, picking at a piece of cake she didn't really want, when she saw him across the room. Her breath caught in her throat. Time had changed him. His hair was shorter. There were lines around his eyes that weren't there before. But it was definitely him. The same Daniel who used to walk her home from college classes, who made her laugh until her stomach hurt, who disappeared from her life the day after graduation, when they both chose their careers over everything else. He was standing near the drinks table, looking a bit lost in the crowd. Lily noticed he kept glancing around, like he was searching for someone, or maybe trying to find an excuse to leave early. She understood that feeling. These past few months had been rough for her. The divorce papers were finally signed, and she was still getting used to being alone again. Still getting used to sleeping on just one side of the bed. Still learning how to introduce herself without mentioning someone else's name. Their eyes met. It was one of those moments that felt like the whole room went quiet, even though the music was still playing and people were still laughing. Daniel's face changed. Recognition, surprise, maybe even relief. He smiled, that same crooked smile she remembered, and started walking toward her table. Lily's heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. They spent the next 3 hours talking. Everything else at the wedding faded into the background. They talked about the old days, about professors they loved and hated, about that terrible pizza place near campus that somehow they both missed. But they also talked about now. Daniel told her about his wife, about how cancer had taken her 2 years ago, about how he still sometimes set the table for two out of habit. Lily found herself crying as he spoke, not just for his pain, but because she understood it. Different circumstances, same emptiness. She told him about her marriage, about how it had slowly fallen apart like a sweater unraveling thread by thread, about how her husband had wanted her to be someone she wasn't, and how she'd tried so hard to become that person that she'd lost herself completely. About the relief she felt when it finally ended, mixed with the shame of feeling relieved. Daniel listened without interrupting, without offering solutions, without making her feel like she needed to explain herself. It was the first time in months that Lily felt actually heard. When the wedding reception started winding down, Daniel walked her back to her hotel. It was only 2 blocks away, but they walked so slowly that it took 20 minutes. Neither of them wanted the night to end. They stood in the hotel lobby, and Lily realized she didn't want to say goodbye. Not yet, maybe not ever. But she was also terrified. The last time she'd let someone in, it had ended with lawyers and dividing up furniture and explaining to her parents that, yes, it really was over. Daniel seemed to sense her hesitation. He smiled gently and said they should get coffee tomorrow morning before she left town. Just coffee. Nothing complicated. Lily agreed, even though she knew in her heart it was already complicated. As she rode the elevator up to her room, she caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked different, more awake, more alive. It scared her how much one conversation could change things. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying their conversation, remembering the way he'd looked at her when she laughed, the way his voice got soft when he talked about difficult things. She picked up her phone 3 times to text him, then put it down. What would she even say? Around 3 in the morning, her phone buzzed. It was Daniel. He couldn't sleep either. They texted until sunrise, and Lily realized she was smiling at her phone like a teenager. When was the last time she'd felt this kind of excitement? This kind of hope? It felt dangerous and wonderful at the same time. Like standing at the edge of a cliff and thinking about jumping just to see what it felt like to fly. Coffee the next morning turned into breakfast. Breakfast turned into a walk through the park. The walk turned into lunch. Before Lily knew it, she'd spent the entire day with Daniel, and her flight home was in 3 hours. She should have been packing, calling a cab, checking out of the hotel. Instead, she was sitting on a bench by the river, listening to him talk about the bookstore he'd opened downtown. His wife had always wanted to own a bookstore. They'd talked about it for years, made plans, picked out the perfect location. Then she got sick, and the dream got put on hold. After she passed away, Daniel couldn't let it go. He'd spent the last year building it, one shelf at a time, one book at a time. It was his way of keeping her memory alive, but also his way of moving forward. Lily could hear both the sadness and the pride in his voice. She ended up changing her flight, then changing it again. What was supposed to be a weekend trip turned into 3 weeks. Her sister kept calling, asking when she was coming home, if she was okay, if this was really a good idea. Lily didn't have good answers. All she knew was that being here, in this city with Daniel, felt right in a way that nothing had felt right in years. They fell into an easy routine. Every morning, Daniel would pick her up from the hotel, and they'd grab coffee from this little shop on the corner that made the best caramel lattes. Then they'd spend the day at his bookstore. Lily found herself helping out, organizing shelves, talking to customers, suggesting books. She'd always loved reading. But somewhere along the way, she'd stopped, too busy, too tired, too focused on trying to save a marriage that was already gone. Now, surrounded by stories again, she remembered this part of herself that she'd buried. The bookstore was special. It wasn't just about selling books. Daniel had created a space where people could belong. There were comfortable chairs in every corner, a table where people could leave books for others to take, a bulletin board filled with community events and handwritten notes. An older man came in every Tuesday to read poetry out loud. A group of teenagers met there after school to work on homework together. A woman brought her therapy dog on Fridays, and people would sit on the floor and pet him while they browsed. Lily watched how Daniel interacted with everyone. He remembered their names, asked about their families, recommended books based on what was happening in their lives. He'd become part of the neighborhood, a constant in people's routines. She could see why. There was something steady about him, something genuine. He didn't try to be anything other than what he was, but she also noticed the sadness he carried. It was in the way he'd pause sometimes when he passed the poetry section, his wife's favorite, in the way he'd mentioned her in present tense, then correct himself, in the way he kept a photograph of her on his desk, but had turned it slightly away, like he needed some distance but couldn't bring himself to put it away completely. One evening, after they'd closed the store, they sat on the floor between the shelves, sharing a pizza and talking about everything and nothing. Daniel asked her what she wanted from life now, not what she thought she should want, but what she actually wanted. Lily had to think about it. For so long, she'd been focused on what her husband wanted, what her parents expected, what society said she should be doing at her age. Finally, she said she wanted to feel like herself again. She wanted to wake up excited about the day instead of dreading it. She wanted to laugh without feeling guilty about it. She wanted to take risks and make mistakes, and not apologize for taking up space in the world. As she said it out loud, she realized how much of herself she'd given away, piece by piece, trying to make someone else happy. Daniel listened, really listened, and then said something that stuck with her. He said that losing his wife had taught him that life was too short to live it for anyone else. That grief had stripped away all the things that didn't matter and left him with the truth that every single day was a gift, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones, because at least he was still here, still breathing, still capable of feeling something. They sat in comfortable silence after that, surrounded by thousands of stories written by people who'd also struggled and loved and lost and found their way. Lily finally went home to Chicago, but something had shifted inside her. Her apartment felt wrong now. Too quiet. Filled with furniture she didn't even like. She'd let her ex-husband make all the decorating decisions because it seemed easier than arguing. Now she looked around and realized she was living in someone else's space, someone else's life. She started making changes, small ones at first. She bought new pillows in colors she actually liked. She rearranged the furniture. She threw out the fancy coffee maker that had never worked properly but that her ex had insisted on keeping. Every night at 8 o'clock, her phone would ring. Daniel. They'd talk for hours, about everything and nothing. He'd tell her about the customers who came into the bookstore, about the new books he was excited about the stray cat that had started showing up at the back door. She'd tell him about her day, about the job that was slowly draining her soul, about the friends who kept trying to set her up on dates with men she had no interest in meeting. Her sister kept warning her to be careful. "You just got divorced," she'd say. "You're vulnerable. This might just be a rebound thing. You're confusing nostalgia with real feelings. Maybe you're just scared of being alone." Lily knew her sister meant well, but she also knew this was different. This wasn't about running away from loneliness. This was about running towards something real. 2 months passed like this. Phone calls and text messages, and the growing ache of missing someone. Then one Friday, Daniel called and said he'd booked a flight to Chicago for the weekend. If that was okay, if she wanted to see him. If it wasn't too soon or too much. Lily's heart jumped into her throat. "Yes," she said. "Yes. Please come." That weekend felt like a test of something, though neither of them said it out loud. Daniel arrived Friday evening, and they went to dinner at this small Italian place in her neighborhood. The conversation flowed easily, like no time had passed at all, but there was also a new tension between them, an awareness. They weren't just old friends anymore. This was something else. Something that hadn't been named yet but hung in the air between them. On Saturday, they walked through the city. Lily showed him the art museum, the lakefront, the deep dish pizza place that tourists loved and locals argued about. They held hands, casually at first, like it was no big deal. But Lily couldn't stop thinking about how right it felt. How his hand fit perfectly in hers, how she didn't feel the need to fill every silence with words. That night, back at her apartment, they opened a bottle of wine and put on some old jazz music. The conversation turned deeper, more vulnerable. Daniel talked about his wife in a way he hadn't before, about how guilty he felt for being happy again, about how sometimes he'd catch himself laughing or enjoying something, and then he'd feel like he was betraying her memory, about how grief wasn't something you got over, but something you learned to carry differently. Lily shared her own fears. She talked about how her marriage had made her doubt everything about herself. How her husband had slowly convinced her that she was too emotional, too sensitive, too demanding. How she'd started to believe that maybe she was the problem, that maybe she was incapable of being loved the way she needed. How even now, months after the divorce, she sometimes woke up believing those lies. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, this small distance between them that felt like a canyon. Both of them were damaged in different ways, carrying wounds that hadn't fully healed. Both of them were terrified of making another mistake, of hurting or being hurt again. But there was also something else. Hope, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, two broken people could help each other become whole again. The conversation got quieter. The space between them felt charged with everything they weren't saying. Daniel set his wine glass down on the coffee table, and Lily noticed his hand was shaking slightly. He looked at her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Daniel looked at Lily like he was trying to memorize her face. Every detail, like he was afraid this moment might disappear. He said something that made her heart stop. He said he hadn't felt this scared in years, and he'd been through the worst thing a person could imagine. He'd watched the person he loved most in the world slip away, powerless to stop it. But this, sitting here with her, feeling this pull between them, this terrified him in a completely different way. Lily understood exactly what he meant. She'd been through her own kind of loss. Different, but just as real. She'd lost herself in a marriage that slowly suffocated who she was. She'd lost faith in her own judgment, her own worth, and now, sitting here with Daniel, she was terrified of getting it wrong again. Terrified of wanting something so much that she'd ignore all the warning signs. Terrified that maybe she was broken in ways that couldn't be fixed. But she was also tired of being afraid. Tired of playing it safe. Where had safe gotten her? A failed marriage. An apartment full of furniture she hated. A job that made her feel empty. And a life that looked fine on paper but felt hollow inside. Daniel stood up slowly, and for a second Lily thought he was leaving. That they'd both decided this was too risky, too complicated, too soon, that they'd retreat back to their separate lives where at least they couldn't hurt each other. But instead, he crossed the small distance between them and sat down next to her on the couch, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something woodsy and familiar. He turned to face her fully. His eyes searched hers, looking for something. Permission, maybe. Or confirmation that she felt this too. That it wasn't just in his head. His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "Tell me if this is too much," he said. "Tell me if I should leave. Tell me if I'm reading this wrong." But Lily couldn't speak. Her throat felt tight. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. She'd spent so many months feeling numb, feeling nothing, and now she was feeling everything all at once. Fear and excitement and hope and terror, all mixed together until she couldn't tell them apart. Daniel reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, to laugh it off, to protect them both from whatever this was. His hand trembled slightly as his fingers brushed her cheek, gentle like he was touching something precious that might break. The touch sent electricity through her entire body. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be touched like this, like she mattered, like she was wanted. He leaned in, moving so slowly that Lily could count her own heartbeats. Could have stopped this at any moment. Could have made a joke. Changed the subject. Stepped back into the safety of friendship, but she didn't move. Didn't breathe, just watched as he came closer, his eyes never leaving hers, asking a question without words. He stopped with his lips just inches from hers. So close she could feel his breath. So close that one tiny movement would close the gap. But he didn't move. He just stayed there, suspended in that impossible moment, giving her every possible chance to say no, to push him away, to choose safety over risk. His hand was still on her cheek, his thumb brushing softly across her skin. She could see everything in his eyes. The fear, the hope, the longing, the question, and she knew he could see the same things in hers. They stayed like that for what felt like forever, balanced on the edge of something that would change everything. This was the moment, the choice, the leap, and they both knew it. Lily closed the distance. Her lips met his, and everything else disappeared. The fear, the doubt, the voices in her head telling her all the reasons this was a bad idea, all of it vanished. There was only this moment. This kiss that was somehow both gentle and desperate, careful and certain, like they were both afraid to break something fragile, but also couldn't help themselves. When they finally pulled apart, both of them had tears streaming down their faces. Happy tears, sad tears, relieved tears, scared tears, all mixed together. They didn't try to wipe them away or apologize for them. They just looked at each other and laughed softly. That kind of laugh that comes when you don't know whether to cry or celebrate, so you do both. Daniel pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Lily buried her face in his chest. They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other, listening to each other breathe. It felt like coming home after being lost for years. It felt like finally being safe enough to fall apart and knowing someone would help pick up the pieces. They didn't rush into anything that night. They just lay on the couch together, wrapped around each other, talking until the sun came up. They talked about what this meant, what they wanted, what scared them. They made promises to be honest, to communicate, to not repeat the mistakes of their past relationships. They acknowledged that this might not work out, that they were both carrying heavy baggage, that healing wasn't linear and some days would be harder than others. But they also agreed to try, to take the risk, to choose hope over fear. Daniel flew back to Portland on Sunday, but the goodbye felt different this time. It wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. 2 weeks later, Lily gave notice at her job. Her boss was shocked. Her co-workers thought she was crazy. Her sister said she was making a huge mistake, throwing away her career for some guy. But Lily knew better. She wasn't throwing anything away. She was finally reaching for something she actually wanted. She spent those 2 weeks getting her life in order, packing up her apartment, saying goodbye to friends, finishing projects at work. With each box she packed, she felt lighter, like she was shedding an old skin that had never quite fit right. She kept only the things that mattered, the things that felt like her. Everything else she donated or sold or threw away. Moving to Portland felt right. Not rushed or crazy or impulsive. Just right. Daniel helped her find an apartment. Nothing fancy, but it had big windows and hardwood floors, and it felt like a place where she could breathe. She started working part-time at the bookstore and discovered she loved it. Loved talking to customers about books, loved creating displays, loved being part of a community that actually cared about stories and ideas, and each other. They took things slowly, both of them hyper-aware of their wounds, determined not to rush into anything just because it felt good. They went to therapy, both individually and together, working through their grief and trauma, with someone who could help them navigate it. Some days were hard. Daniel would have moments where the guilt would hit him, where he'd pull away and need space. Lily would have days where her old insecurities would creep back in, where she'd need reassurance that she was enough. But they learned to talk through it. Learned to give each other space when needed, but also to reach out when the space became a wall. Learned that love wasn't about being perfect or healed or having all the answers. It was about showing up, being honest, and choosing each other even on the days when it was hard. A year after that wedding where they'd reunited, they got married themselves. Small ceremony in the bookstore. Surrounded by friends and shelves of stories, and the smell of old paper and fresh coffee. Lily wore a simple dress, nothing fancy. Daniel read her a poem his first wife had loved, and Lily honored that. Understood that loving him meant accepting all of him, including the parts that still belonged to someone else. It wasn't a fairy tale. They both had scars that ached sometimes. There were hard days and arguments and moments of doubt. But it was real. It was honest. And it was theirs. Built on the courage it took to lean in when every instinct screamed to run away. Built on the choice to believe in possibility even when fear made more sense. Built on two broken people who decided that maybe, together, they could be whole.